There was a time when Rome was known as the Caput Mundi, which translates as the capital of the world. At the height of the Roman Empire, this was very accurate indeed, because all roads really did lead to Rome. And after the fall of this great civilization, the city's importance as the seat of the papacy ensured it continued to play a major role in world affairs as the centuries passed. Nevertheless, the fortunes of Rome still had a habit of fluctuating, and during the Middle Ages it suffered something of a decline, before recovering spectacularly as the ultimate Renaissance city to eventually become Italy's capital in 1870. Consequently, this is a city of quite remarkable contrasts, where ancient and modern sit comfortably side by side, with every imaginable variation to be found nestling between the two. Rome is built on either side of the river Tiber, having been founded on the 7 hills that dominated this region of Italy's western coast. But like so many of the world's great cities, Rome actually started out as a more modest settlement. The Iron Age village on the Palatine Hill, which overlooks the ruins of the Forum, was where it all started, and everything you see before you had its origins here. From this cluster of a few buildings, the beautiful city of Rome evolved, with a people as cosmopolitan as the rich heritage you see before you. One minute, you'll find yourself wandering through an ancient temple. The next, drinking a frothing cappuccino in a stylish street cafe, and all with perfect equilibrium, which undoubtedly contributes to Rome's inviting and thoroughly intoxicating atmosphere. For the 21st century visitor to Rome, deciding where to start can present a delightful conundrum. But for many people who come here, it is Vatican City that's the main attraction. Situated on the west bank of the River Tiber, Vatican City has been an independent sovereign state since 1929. And although its fortress-like walls can seem quite intimidating at first sight, if you head for St. Peter's Square, you'll find a very warm welcome awaits you. The square is dominated by St. Peter's Basilica, which is very probably the most famous church in the world, although technically not the largest. As tempting as it may be, though, pause a while before joining the queues to gain entry to this incredible building, because the square itself is equally as fascinating. You really do have to come here to fully appreciate the vastness of Bernini's Piazza San Pietro, and standing in the middle of this most grandiose of public spaces will afford you the most amazing views. Originally constructed between 1656 and 1667, St. Peter's Square, like so much of Rome, has changed very little since it was first built. At the centre of the square stands an imposing obelisk that was brought to Rome by Caligula in 36 AD. Interestingly, it actually used to stand in the centre of Nero's circus on Vatican Hill, which, according to legend, is the site of St. Peter's martyrdom. But in 1586, Pope Sixtus V ordered it to be moved so that it could take pride of place in front of the basilica. This took those charged with the task 4 months to complete, and it was decreed that as a mark of respect, this had to be done in total silence, and that was on pain of death. Looking out from the obelisk and the 2 fountains that stand on either side of the square, you can't help but notice the walkway of Via della Conciliazione, a huge, wide street that brings so many visitors to this most historic of sites. As large and grand as this road is, it sadly detracts from Bernini's original plan for the piazza. Originally, St. Peter's was to be hidden behind the famous small streets of Rome, making its impact on the explorer or pilgrim far more impressive. However, the Italian dictator Mussolini, who had his own plans for creating a second Roman Empire during the Second World War, also had grand ideas for the street leading up to St. Peter's and bulldozed the then existing Via della Conciliazione to the ground. This made way for this airy, yet some would say slightly soulless street, which now tends to be filled with traffic rather than anything of interest. But for those in search of more spiritual fulfillment, it's only necessary to gaze heavenwards, to view the many sculptures of the saints that watch over the square. To be precise, there are 140 of them dotted around the piazza, and all of them seem to be looking down benevolently on the people below, protecting pilgrims and visitors alike who've made the journey to the place that is at the heart of the Roman Catholic faith. And so we come to the great church of St. Peter, which is visible from many vantage points around the city, with a magnificent dome that was designed by Michelangelo, even though it wasn't actually completed until after his death. Beneath it stands the baldacchino, a canopy of gilded bronze, above both the Pope's altar and the place where history claims St. Peter's tomb lies. A shrine was first erected on this site in honour of St. Peter in the 2nd century, but the first great church to be built here was completed in around 349 AD, on the orders of the Emperor Constantine. However, by the 15th century it had fallen into a poor state of repair. A new church was therefore ordered by Pope Julius II, who laid the first stone in 1506. Although it did take more than a century for the completion of St. Peter's, which is why you'll find examples of both Renaissance and Baroque architecture. Another sight that is definitely worth seeing while at St. Peter's is the view from the top of the dome. But be warned, there are over 300 fairly narrow steps to be climbed, so it's not for the faint-hearted. However, once at the summit, the effort will be rewarded, because from the top of St. Peter's, the streets of Rome open out below you, and from here you can see the 7 hills that surround the city. One thing you should ensure you have when visiting the Vatican is plenty of time, because as well as St. Peter's Square and the Basilica, the Vatican museums are also worthy of a great deal of your attention. These museums are positively compelling, housing some of the art world's most prized and priceless treasures, and should not be missed. Just by taking a walk through the many corridors and galleries, you'll come face to face with many beautiful, instantly recognisable paintings and sculptures. Of course, the most famous of these are the frescoes that adorn the Sistine Chapel, painted by Michelangelo over a period of 4 years. The Sistine Chapel represents arguably the greatest masterpiece in Western art, and is the largest body of painting that's ever been created by one man. But there's a great deal more to see here besides, including the Raphael rooms and a wonderful museum of African art. It would be all too easy to spend hours and hours wandering through the Vatican museums, but following the course of the river Tiber will bring you to the imposing Castel Sant'Angelo just a short distance away. Hadrian, one of the many emperors of Rome, constructed this huge round building to serve as his mausoleum in the 2nd century. Hadrian hoped that his remains would rest here for as long as the mausoleum stood, but sadly his eternal peace was disturbed a few hundred years later. In the 6th century, Hadrian's mausoleum was transformed into a fortress, and it's easy to see why this decision was made when looking at the castle from afar, because the building really does dominate the landscape. Originally, as Hadrian's mausoleum, this building looked very different to the huge construction that we see before us today. The impressive monument to the late emperor was covered in white marble and surrounded by statues and glorious cypresses that reached high into the Rome sky. It was Pope Gregory the Great who was responsible for the change of use, when the papal authorities wanted an impenetrable fortress that the people of the Vatican could use in times of invasion or siege. Just by looking at the castle from the outside, it's possible to get a sense of how secure they would have felt, protected by these massive walls when the need arose, which it certainly did, and down through the ages, the lives of so many popes were saved as a result of taking refuge within the well-rounded walls of the Castel Sant'Angelo. In fact, the papal authorities covered every eventuality, quite literally, building a secret passage from St. Peter's all the way to the castle. Known as the Vatican Corridor in English, the Passetto di Borgo, from the outside, simply looks like an imposing 30-foot high wall, very much like any other ancient wall you'd find in so many of the major cities of the world. Its rather dull exterior nonetheless hides within it the secret passage that led popes of various eras to safety. The corridor is about 800 metres long, and as people wander around this part of Rome, it's impossible for them not to notice the Great Wall. But unless they've done their research, many visitors have no idea there's a secret passage concealed within the brickwork. Today, a limited number of visitors are able to walk along the corridor that was so crucial to the Vatican, and the fortress itself has been opened up to the public, where they can wander through the corridors and rooms, some filled with guns and armour, as you'd expect of an arsenal of this size. However, what you may not have anticipated is the delightful little cafe at the top, offering glorious views across the River Tiber. It's also worth looking out for the gigantic bronze statue of the Archangel Michael that presides over the castle, and from where it gets its name. The sculpture was created by the Flemish artist Peter Anton von Verschaffelt in 1753, and the round hall, which can be found just below, houses the original cast from which the angel was made. The angel at the top of the castle has weathered the ravages of time very well indeed, as has another popular tourist destination known as the Spanish Steps that have stood here since 1726. The main purpose for the steps had been to link the Church of the Trinita de' Monti with the square below. The French owners even planned a statue of Louis XIV at the top. The then Pope objected strongly to there being a French monarch honoured in the papal city, and the argument continued for many years. Eventually, the Italian architect, Francesco di Sanctis, came up with a design that pleased everybody, and the result is what you see before you today. When Charles Dickens visited Rome on his travels in the 19th century, he noted that the Spanish Steps were the place where artists' models would dress up in colourful traditional costume, hoping that a wealthy painter would pay for their services. There may not be artists' models here anymore, but people love to meet and linger on the steps, often sitting a while to watch the world go by, write postcards home, and listen to the buskers. However, should you think this is a good spot for an alfresco lunch, sadly you'll have to think again, because eating is not allowed. For those of a romantic disposition, the Spanish Steps have a definite air of possibility, and close by you'll find the house where arguably one of the world's most romantic poets, John Keats, died. The wonderful Keats-Shelley Memorial House, with colours that reflect the square, is a museum that commemorates the fact that Keats spent the last few months of his life here in 1821, before his death at the tender age of 25. The death of Keats actually inspired another great romantic English poet, Percy Bysshe Shelley, to write the poem Mourn Not for Adonis. But sadly, Shelley too died young, drowning in a boating accident soon afterwards. Both poets are actually buried in Rome's Protestant cemetery and jointly remembered in this delightful literary museum. Now, should all this talk of the romantic poets of English literature put you in the mood for a pot of fine tea and a slice of rich cake, surprising as it may seem, Rome can actually accommodate you. A quick dash across to the other side of the steps will bring you to the oldest tea rooms in all of Italy. The Babington tea rooms have been serving a dizzy array of exquisite teas since 1893. And although not strictly an Italian tradition, they do make an excellent brew that can help any weary traveller unwind for a few moments as they soak in the historical atmosphere. It was two English sisters, Anna Maria and Isabel Cargill Babington, that opened the tea rooms to cater for the late Victorian and early Edwardian travellers for whom Rome was a very popular destination. Scones, jam and Earl Grey tea were very definitely the order of the day, and for 21st century tourists the food remains distinctly British, offering homely comfort food rather than haute cuisine. The reason the Spanish Steps needed to be so grand is immediately evident when you climb up them to visit the Trinita de Monte. Although the main reason for the steps' inception, the magnificent church is often ignored, which is a great shame, because you'll discover remarkable Gothic architecture here, and wonderful paintings by Daniela da Volterra, a pupil of Michelangelo. And of course, even if you've had your fill of fine churches at the Vatican, the view from the top of the steps is one of the most delightful in Rome. But do be careful of your possessions here, as particularly when it's busy, this is an area where pickpockets are known to operate. Making your way back down the steps and wandering through the square, you might be a little surprised at what's being sold, and you'll certainly struggle to find a historic artifact. The elegant shop windows are nearly all filled with modern designer goods, and for the most stylish and fashionable emporiums of all, Via Condotti is most definitely the place to go after reaching the bottom of the Spanish Steps. This is where crowds flock to gaze upon the clothes, shoes, accessories and leather bags that tend to be exclusively the province of the rich and famous, courtesy of their price tags. Walking really is one of the best ways to explore Rome if you want to discover the most intriguing parts of this fascinating city. As you meander slowly around its streets, you can't help but notice how welcoming the narrow lanes of Rome actually are. Along every pavement there seems to be either a cafe serving aromatic Italian coffee, a high fashion store, or an inviting restaurant. Rome really does reward the adventurous, and by putting on your walking shoes you'll uncover some of Italy's most precious treasures. And having done so much walking, you can of course indulge in the rich array of food and drink on offer wherever you happen to go. One of Rome's most astonishing hidden gems is the Trevi Fountain. Now, of course, everyone knows about the Trevi Fountain, but despite its fame worldwide, most people are unaware of the best way to view it. For the fountain to create its biggest impact, it really should be stumbled upon, as if by accident, while you wander the streets. Don't look for the Trevi Fountain, let it find you, and you'll be rewarded 1,000-fold. It's actually just a short walk from the Spanish Steps, and as so many of the streets around it are narrow with tall buildings that obscure the bigger picture, when you do take in the grandeur of the fountain for the first time, it makes it seem even larger than it really is. The Trevi Fountain is a magnificent Baroque sculpture draped effortlessly across rocks that seem to have formed organically as an offshoot from the Renaissance palace to which it's attached. The fountain took well over 30 years to create, and sadly the designer Niccolo Salvi died before its completion in 1762. The fountain is powered by a complex structure of waterworks, and because of this, Salvi had to spend much of his time underground in dark, dank conditions, and so developed lung problems, which ultimately cost him his life. Above ground, however, nothing could possibly be described as dark and dank. The radiant sculptures and gushing water make the Trevi Fountain one of Rome's most popular attractions, where Neptune's chariots leap from the water, adorned with seahorses, all representing the contrasting moods of the seven seas. But this isn't the only reason that so many visitors come here. What's more, they're willing to part with their money when they get to the Trevi Fountain. Custom has it that if you throw a coin into the pool, you're sure to return to Rome one day, a prospect that seems very attractive indeed. In fact, approximately 3,000 euros a day are collected from the pool and used to help good causes. But it isn't quite as simple as hurling in your loose change. For the magic of the Trevi to work, devotees of Rome who wish to come back should face out from the fountain and throw 3 coins with their right hand over their left shoulder. And for all those that come here, let's hope that it does. With so many wonderful sights to see, it'll come as no surprise that more than halfway through our journey we have yet to visit what many consider to be Rome's greatest attraction. No trip, be it virtual or in person, to this fascinating city would be complete without an excursion to the iconic building that is the Colosseum. The crumbling arches of this huge ancient stadium remain as a lasting testament to everything that the Roman Empire stood for. The very fact that this building was created almost 2,000 years ago is proof, if ever it was required, of just what the Romans were capable of. Inside this wonderful building, 70,000 Roman citizens would gather to enjoy the spectacle of everything from gladiatorial battles to Christians being fed to the lions. Today, fortunately, it's the amazing Roman architecture that attracts the crowds to the Colosseum, rather than the bloodthirsty pursuits of the ancient past. The founder of the Colosseum was the Emperor Vespasian in AD 72, a former soldier who bravely commissioned the great amphitheatre on marshy ground that had been the site of a lake in the grounds of his predecessor, Nero's palace. The project took some 6 years to complete, and with 80 arched entrances, Corinthian, Ionic and Doric columns, to mention just a few of the features, it's hardly surprising. Interestingly, although undoubtedly colossal in its own right, the name Colosseum is thought to have been bestowed upon the building because a huge statue, known as the Colossus of Nero, stood right next to this hive of activity in ancient Rome. As a show of strength and the power of the Roman Empire, the Colosseum delivered everything Vespasian had hoped for, and to this day, stadiums around the world are still modelled on this historic blueprint. In fact, an image of the Colosseum was engraved on Olympic medals right up until the Sydney Games of 2000. Despite the Colosseum being damaged over the years due to neglect, it's still one of the most magnificent sights any world traveller could wish to see. With careful preservation, long gone are the days when the great architects and builders plundered stone from the facade for their palaces and bridges. And having stood firm for 2 millenniums, there's every chance the Colosseum will survive many more. Rome is one of those truly amazing cities, and no matter where you turn, the sights that will greet you are all to be treasured. This is most definitely the case in the district around the Colosseum, where the sheer number of ancient ruins, not to mention their quality, can only be described as phenomenal. Visitors only have to cross the road from the Colosseum, past the impressive Arch of Constantine, to be guaranteed a glimpse of ancient Rome that really will leave them speechless. Stretching out seemingly forever are the ruins of the Forum that were once the beating heart and centre of life in ancient Rome. A mass of columns, half-ruined temples, and foundations litter the Via Sacra, which translates as Sacred Way, because it was the path that religious and triumphal processions followed towards the capital. If there was ever a place to really get a taste of what it must have been like when the Roman Empire was at its most spectacular, it has to be here, and by just slowly meandering through the ruins, you can actually picture what it must have been like. For aficionados of William Shakespeare's play Julius Caesar, with a little time to spare, it's possible to locate the rostrum from where Mark Antony is said to have delivered the famous line, "Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears." And there is no shortage of fine views that would be the envy of any theatre producer attempting to stage the play. But sadly for the Forum and the great empire of Rome, just like Julius Caesar, the days of glory were numbered. As the empire crumbled, so did the Forum, and you can only imagine how wonderful this place would have appeared all those centuries ago. Nevertheless, there are some remarkable features to look out for. There's no better example of this than the Temple of Saturn, with its huge columns that dominate the majority of views of the Roman Forum. The temple is not just one of the most intact ruins in this area, but has also proved to be one of the oldest. Created in about 500 BC, this temple, as the name suggests, was built in honour of the agricultural deity Saturn. Although dedicated to the god Saturn, the actual use of the building was as the Roman treasury. Within the temple's walls, the Roman Empire's reserves of gold and silver were stored for safekeeping. Sadly, like most of the ruins in the Forum, all that remains today are the vast columns that would have graced the front of the building. However, even as a ruin, they still evoke a sense of grandeur, and this is definitely the place to come to get a sense of the huge scale that characterised ancient Rome. Now, standing amongst these atmospheric ruins and relics of long-gone palaces and temples, you might find yourself wondering if there are any examples of Roman architecture that have managed to remain fully intact down through the ages. Well, the answer is a resounding yes, and if you make your way to the Piazza della Rotonda, you can see for yourself the most amazing example of the true genius of Roman civilization. There's something delightfully charming about this small square, surrounded by cafes where visitors of all nationalities stop to eat, drink and rest a while. But when you come face to face with the Pantheon, you know you're in the presence of greatness. One of the main reasons for the Pantheon's survival fully intact is as a result of it becoming a church in the Middle Ages, rather than being left as a disused Roman temple of all the gods. At first glance, however, you won't see the most dramatic feature of this building, until, that is, you step inside. What you see here is a vast rotunda with a height and diameter that are equal at 140 feet. At the top of the dome, the oculus, which is quite literally open to the elements, provides the only source of light. It is indeed a marvel of Roman engineering, instigated by the Emperor Hadrian in the 2nd century, to replace an even earlier temple, but today you'll find additions from many of the centuries since. The most famous tomb to be seen here is that of the great Italian Renaissance artist Raphael, who died in 1520 and was buried here at his own request. This truly is a fascinating building. Unfortunately, as rainfall is minimal in Rome, the hole in the dome poses little problem. Nevertheless, the Roman architects did have every eventuality covered, and if you look closely at the marble floor, which was restored in 1873, you'll still find the drainage holes of the original design. Rome is, in fact, world-renowned for its many churches that seem to be dotted along every street and square of this historical city. To prove this point, we only need to take a very short walk out of the Pantheon to the next piazza to discover yet another church with plenty of historical significance. The church of Santa Maria sopra Minerva actually dates back to the 13th century and is one of the few examples of Gothic architecture to be found in Rome. It was built on the ancient ruins of the site of the Temple of Minerva, although it is the more monumental style of the Roman Renaissance that's most notably represented, with the tombs of the Medici popes Leo X and Clement VII. The church is also in possession of some spectacular works of art that date all the way back to the Baroque period. So no matter how many of Rome's churches you've already visited, it's definitely worth taking the time to enjoy this delightful and historic place of worship. Now, as you come back out into the Piazza della Minerva, you may well notice something rather unusual about the obelisk in the centre of the square. There are many spectacular obelisks to be found in Rome, but this one, set on the back of an elephant, is quite remarkable. The elephant is a testament to the vivid imagination of the artist Bernini, although it was actually sculpted to his design by Ercole Ferrata, and is a fine example of Bernini's unique vision. It was originally intended as a joke to decorate the Palazzo Barberini, but there was a more serious reason for the choice of subject, as the elephant was an ancient symbol of intelligence and piety, virtues that the Christian Church at this time most definitely aspired to. Other churches in the district around the Pantheon to look out for include the Church of St. Eustace, or Sant Eustachio as the Romans know it. This one dates from the times of the early Christians, when it offered relief to the poor and needy. You also do need to make sure you look heavenwards when viewing this church, as despite the rebuilding of the 17th and 18th centuries, the Romanesque bell tower is a rare survivor of the medieval era, and can be all too easy to miss. And if you'd like to see a church that's very different again, just metres from Sant Eustachio, is the church of Santa Maria Maddalena, dedicated to Mary Magdalene. Built in the 17th century, it's a fine example of a Rococo-style facade, and this kind of architecture is often referred to as icing sugar style, which you can see is very appropriate indeed when you look at all the swirling shapes and embellishments that decorate the front of the building. This church is another stunning example of the hidden gems that Rome has to offer anyone who's prepared to take just a few steps off the main tourist track. Situated in a quiet little piazza, you could easily miss this church altogether, which, like so many of this city's less well-known sites, has just as much charm and elegance as the more popular tourist attractions. Rome is, without doubt, a city of great contrasts, and from a tiny Rococo church, which can often be overlooked, we come to our next destination, which could never be described as being obscured in any way from public view. This is the world-famous Piazza Navona, where if modern Rome had a centre point, then this square would be it. The square is a wonderful sight and a great place to walk to, as it's reached on most sides by Rome's narrow streets. And just like the piazza where the Trevi Fountain can be found, once seen, it'll never be forgotten. The piazza is light and airy, and all around it are picturesque cafes and bars. Sometimes there are street artists here, or colourful buskers, while on other occasions there are wonderful street markets. But one thing's absolutely certain: whatever happens to be going on in Piazza Navona, it'll always entertain and intrigue any visitor. The first thing you'll spot is the fact that this square is anything but square when it comes to shape, and its classic elongated oval form is due to the fact that historically this is where many great Roman chariot races and athletic events used to take place. Crowds would have cheered as the horses galloped round, but sadly any ruins from this era were removed in the 15th century when the piazza was given a facelift. However, from a more positive perspective, this really is a very stylish and lovely place to enjoy a well-deserved rest and refreshment stop on any tour of Rome. Again, there's an obelisk to mark the centre of the piazza, this time of Egyptian origin, brought here by Pope Innocent X. At the heart of the piazza there are also a number of famous fountains and statues, the most famous being the Fontana di Quattro Fiumi, which is at present undergoing renovation, but represents the great rivers of the world. Bernini was responsible for the design, and although you can't see them on this occasion, all the figures are said to be shielding their eyes in horror at the church of Sant'Agnese in Agone, designed by Bernini's rival, Carlo Borromini. In fact, the church is very lovely to look at, and this is one of history's popular stories that has no foundation whatsoever in fact, as Bernini had completed work on the fountain before Borromini had even started work on the church. Sant'Agnese in Agone is believed to have actually been built on the site of a brothel where, in AD 304, Agnes, the saint who gave her name to this fine place of worship, was tested for her faith by being stripped naked and left to recant. But a miracle saved her modesty, as her hair quickly grew to the floor and covered her embarrassment, although she was later martyred here and is buried in the catacombs. Her fully clothed statue can be found upon the facade, which, despite any suggestions to the contrary, is very beautiful indeed. There are so many truly lovely sights to see in this great city, from the grandeur of the empire-building Romans to the elegant splendour of the Renaissance. You'll literally discover treasure around every corner. Even so, you'll also find evidence of Rome's less than straightforward history during the 20th century, when war raged throughout Europe and the world. Firstly, few could miss the huge Victor Emmanuel monument that was built to celebrate the unification of Italy under the king who gives the great white edifice its name, and is depicted in the oversized gilt bronze statue that dominates the scene. Often mockingly nicknamed the wedding cake, or worse still, the typewriter, this architectural white elephant was inaugurated in 1911, just before the outbreak of World War I. Although considered to be the epitome of self-importance, visitors still flock to see this staggering monument that heralded the birth of Rome's modern age. While here, if you're feeling brave enough to battle with the traffic, crossing the road will bring you face to face with the Palazzo Venezia, which was so significant during the Second World War. If this window looks familiar, it's because this was where the Italian dictator Mussolini used to address the crowds, the building being his headquarters. Rome was actually of great strategic importance during World War II, with Mussolini having grand plans to restore the city to its ancient glory. However, his fascist regime and alliance with Adolf Hitler and his axes of evil, in what Mussolini called the Pact of Steel, did much to harm a city that had already survived a great deal. As American troops marched into Rome early in June 1944, just before the D-Day landings in France, it marked the beginning of the end of Italy's struggles. Mussolini was eventually captured by Italian communist partisans and was shot just days before Hitler took his own life in Berlin, paving the way for Victory in Europe, or VE Day, celebrated on the 8th of March 1945. But when in Rome, you really are never far from ancient history, and at the top of the hill, where the Victor Emmanuel monument stands, you'll get an absolutely spectacular view of the Forum. But there's even more than this delight to enjoy, as once you reach the Piazza del Campidoglio, designed by Michelangelo, you'll find the entrance to the truly magnificent Capitolina Museum. Here you can discover the legend of Rome being founded by Romulus and Remus, the mythological twin sons of the god of war Mars, raised by a she-wolf. And if sculpture happens to be your passion, then you'll have definitely come to the right place. Nobody can possibly miss the huge head of Constantine II that stands in the courtyard, dating back to the 4th century AD. And the bronze equestrian statue of Marcus Aurelius from 2 centuries earlier is equally magnificent. However, one of the most spectacular sights you'll find here at the Capitolina Museum is as a result of the position it happens to occupy. A wall punctuated by a number of fabulous arched windows gives visitors the most amazing vantage point overlooking the Forum, and it really shouldn't be missed. Very sadly, our time in Rome is now drawing rapidly to a close, but we have just one more journey to make upon leaving the Capitolina Museum. If you climb up the 124 marble steps of the Aracoeli staircase, you'll certainly know all about it. Completed in 1348, these really are the steepest steps in Rome. And if you're feeling adventurous, popular legend has it that going up the staircase on your knees will improve your chances of winning the Italian national lottery. It's highly probable, though, that a quick prayer in the church of Santa Maria in Aracoeli at the top would be a better option. But once you've appreciated the wonderful views here, high above Rome, it's always worth stepping inside this delightful and very sacred place of worship that dates right back to the 6th century. After 124 steps, counting the church's 22 columns is a far less arduous task, and they were all brought here from various ancient buildings. The site is thought to have been originally dedicated to Juno, the queen of the gods of Rome, and today, what looks quite plain from the outside actually has a spectacular interior. This was once the church of the Roman senators who gathered at the Forum, and despite being undoubtedly very popular with tourists, there's still a sense of the sacred about Santa Maria in Aracoili, as many people come in to worship as they go about their day-to-day business. It's very hard to define the magic of Rome, and even more difficult to explore every nook and cranny of this beautiful and fascinating city. As you've already seen, for the majority of visitors, the first port of call is likely to be the world-famous Vatican, most notably St. Peter's Square and Basilica. At the heart of the Roman Catholic Church, devout pilgrims can be found alongside the sightseers, making this a very special and spiritual place from whatever perspective you happen to be viewing it. Another great favourite with everyone is the Sistine Chapel, adorned with dramatically vibrant images. But the journey to reach it, through the fascinating rooms and lengthy corridors of the Vatican Museum, is equally spectacular if you can curb your impatience to see Michelangelo's masterpiece. But if this wasn't treasure enough, the relics of ancient Rome allow visitors to actually come into contact with one of the world's greatest civilizations of all time. With such spectacular highlights as the Colosseum, the Forum, and the almost perfect Pantheon, historians, whether professional or keenly amateur, will find themselves quite literally touching the past. Without doubt, although such sights are truly unforgettable, Rome has a unique style that would earn it a place as one of the world's top cities, even if it were not for the Vatican and an ancient civilization. Wandering the narrow streets and discovering the Trevi Fountain is a remarkable experience. Judging by the crowds that can always be found here, throwing coins over their shoulders into the water, one visit to Rome is evidently not enough. Wherever you go, the architecture is mesmerising, the statues overwhelming, the atmosphere completely charming. You'll find delightful surprises around every corner, and if you just allow Rome to weave its magic, the memories you'll forever carry of this incredible place are guaranteed to make you smile, however long it happens to have been since you were there. Lord Byron described Rome as the city of the soul, while Rudyard Kipling wrote of it as being above the nations. But hopefully, you'll now be able to make up your own mind about the city built so long ago on 7 hills, and more importantly perhaps, have been inspired to follow one of the many roads that history tells us all lead to Rome.